Hello, everyone. My name is Sahar Driver. I am the co-director of Color Congress alongside Sonia Childress, who you'll hear from in a moment. Welcome to the webinar. I am an Iranian-American woman sitting against a magenta-hued Color Congress branded background, virtual background. I have long brown hair that is tied in a braid to the side, and I'm wearing clear rimmed glasses. We have captioning available today. It's an option at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It's the button that says CC Show Captions if you need them. If you have any access needs that we have not provided for, please direct message Andrea Ayala, and we'll do our best to provide what you need. The context for today's conversation is really to showcase the Color Congress ecosystem in action. Because while we talk about its importance a lot, sometimes showing is better than telling. For a field focused on films and filmmakers, it's easy to overlook all the behind the scenes activity that is necessary to support the work of filmmaking. For every film and filmmaker, there are a constellation of organizations that have wrapped around to help make those beautiful stories and careers possible. This is especially important for filmmakers of color who operate in an industry that was not built for people of color, to perhaps tell stories about people of color in some cases, but not to support storytelling by and for people of color. In any film's life and a filmmaker's career, there are multiple touch points and organizations set up to support them at those points, from organizations that support the vision of artists and help to nurture their voices, film festivals that showcase their work, professional development networks that connect them and offer pitch training or proposal writing assistance, organizations who fund their films or distribute them. As the Color Congress membership grew to 93 organizations, we realized that all of the vital roles of the documentary ecosystem are present in our membership. And what better way to understand the unique and vital role these organizations play for filmmakers of color than to follow the path that two really talented filmmakers took and the powerful films they most recently made. By now, you've hopefully had a chance to watch both Unseen by Seth Hernandez and Sansón en mí by Rodrigo Reyes. We hope you enjoyed the artistry and beautiful storytelling of their work. We're looking forward to being in conversation with them and representatives from the organizations that have been some of their greatest champions along the way. We'll spend the first half of the hour in conversation with Unseen and the second half in conversation with Sansón en mí. We'll have a bit of time at the end of the hour for your questions about either film, so please drop them into the Q&A function at any point, and we'll do our best to get to them at the end. I'm going to pass it over to Sonia to kick off the conversation.
Thank you, Sahar, and welcome everyone. My name is Sonia Childress. I'm the co-director with Sahar of the Color Congress. I am a Black woman with long locks, glasses. I'm wearing a burnt orange sweater against a Dutch African print backdrop that's magenta and purple. And it says Color Congress in the corner. And I am super excited about this conversation because I get to chat with some of my favorite people in our field and on the planet. So joining me in conversation around the film Unseen is the director, Seth Hernandez. Unseen was released just last month. Unseen is Seth's first feature-length film. Seth is a queer, undocumented filmmaker who hails from the Philippines. Up next is, welcome, Seth.
Yes, my internet was breaking up a little bit, but I just said thank you so much, Sonia, for having me.
Wonderful, welcome. Up next is Pedro. Pedro is Unseen's main protagonist. Pedro is a social worker who also happens to be blind and undocumented. Unseen tells his story. Welcome, Pedro. Pedro's going to stay off camera to support this internet connection. So, but welcome to the conversation, Pedro. Next up is Jason Da Silva. Jason is the founder of Axis Lab, which was created to support documentary filmmakers and nonfiction new media creators of color with disabilities like himself. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you very much, Sonia. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. So let's get into it. Let's start with you, Seth. You and I met back in 2017, 2018. You were a member of the Impact Producer Fellowship at Firelight Media, which I launched to train organizers of color to lead documentary impact campaigns. And it was clear to me that the lens that you brought to your work that centers care and justice was really apparent in every role that you play as an impact producer, but also as an immigrant rights organizer, as the co-founder of the Undocumented Filmmakers Collective. You are a true organizer at heart, but really you are an artist as well. And the idea for this film has been years in the making. And I know that Axis Lab gave you some of the first funding for the film. Can you share a little bit about your journey to make your first feature-length film and what Jason's early support of the film meant for you?
Yes, thank you so much, Sonia, for having me again. And if my internet connection kind of fails me, please do let me know if you can't hear me anymore. A quick visual description of myself. I have a round face, olive complexion, black hair, black rimmed glasses, black beard, a black shirt, and I have a blurry background behind me of my apartment. And I also just want to say, because I don't think I'll get to mention this throughout the conversation, but it's just such a privilege to be here also with the team for Sanson and me, because Rodrigo actually was one of the first folks that was really supporting me also last year when he was still at BAVAC, looking for an editor and just all the connections in between. And also Carlos is one of my mentors for the Firelight Doc Lab. So it's just a full circle moment. And to your point, Sonia, this project really has taken a long time in gestation mode. And maybe part of it too is when Pedro and I first started filming, this is something that he and I talk about often. We were filming, but I'll speak for myself. I didn't always know what I was doing, to be honest. And I wasn't always sure also whether the film will get made because of the restrictions that, I've experienced as an undocumented immigrant who's pursuing filmmaking. And at the time, there were so many, even to this day, actually, there's a lot of funds that restrict applicants based on their immigration status and their citizenship. And along the way of making the film, it was inevitable to create and co-found the Undocumented Filmmakers Collective, because I realized I was not the only person who was going through this. And when I realized that other people from my community was also going through the same thing, I was like, let's hang out. That hangout turned into an organization, and 5 years later, the collective is still here, doing powerful work. So just really a mad shout out to the leaders at the Undocumented Filmmakers Collective, and I think at the same time also, it was, I think in 2021, my producer, Day Al Mohammed, actually, she was the one that told me about the Access Film Fund, with Jason. And actually, Jason, I don't know if you remember this, but I think the first time I met you in person, Sonia introduced us during the Constellations convening with the Center for Cultural Power right before the pandemic. So all these organizations led me to Jason, and I feel like because there were just a lot of challenges and barriers to pursue funding for the film. I think it really took a long time to bring the film out, even at this stage, and I think what was the most important things that we've experienced from, at the Access Film Fund, with Naomi, also shout out to Naomi Middleton, who was our coordinator in the fund. She was really intentional in connecting us with a mentor and our mentor happens to be Reed Davenport, and I think what was really important in this experience is that we didn't have to explain anything about the context of the film, because I think often films about disability, sometimes there's a desire to explain to non-disabled people the experiences of a person with disabilities. And I think with Unseen, Pedro always tells me about how he's really interested in first storytelling, and I feel like with Unseen, we just wanted to dive in, like, this is Pedro, the circumstance of his life, bam, and then let's move on, let's tell, like, what's going on with his life, and I think what was exciting with the Access Film Fund is we were paired with a mentor, aside from the funding, of course, that, we didn't have to explain anything to. So it was just really amazing. So thank you for having us.
Well, Jason, when you first heard about this film and you're thinking about what you understand of Set's film and Pedro's story in particular, how did that align with the kind of films that you want Access Lab to support?
Yeah, so let's take a step back. So my name is Jason. I'm an Indian male in my 40s and sitting in my living room, and yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I'm in a wheelchair, so let me take a step back. So I was a filmmaker for 20 years, and then I came up with the idea to start Access Film Fund. So I was traveling around the film festivals circuit, and I realized there's no filmmakers with disabilities that were people of color. But that's when I realized there really is a need to get stories like this to be told. So that's when I created the nonprofit, then created the Access Film Fund. So Seth was one of our first films, and we're really excited. It immediately came to what we wanted to see, which was getting these stories out there. And yeah, it's a beautiful story, and we were excited to support it. We worked with the Bertha Foundation, and they were the first funders that worked with us to fund the projects. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason. Let's bring Isil Borlasa into the conversation. Isil is from Visual Communications, which is one of the longest running organizations in the Color Congress membership. Visual Communications supports the voices of Asian American and Pacific Islander filmmakers through a number of programs, including the Armed with a Camera Fellowship, their annual spectacular LA Asian Pacific Islander Film Festival, a film development fund, a fiscal sponsorship, among many other things. Isil is also a longtime supporter of filmmakers on the PR side, and she hails from the LBC, where I also reside, Long Beach, California. Hey, hey, welcome, Isil.
Thank you for having me, Sonia, and it's wonderful to be in community with y'all. My visual description is I am a Philippine woman seated in front of a red and blue mural painted by Jason Pereira, and I'm wearing a black dress, long black curly hair, a white flower in my hair.
Beautiful. So Set, when we approached you to have this conversation with us, you mentioned immediately how important it was, the support you received from Visual Communications over, many, many years, and not just the support that you received as an artist, but even the way that Visual Communications intersected with the lives of your family members. So tell us a little bit about this longstanding love affair with this organization and the people within it, and what it's meant, what this kind of support has meant to you. And then I'll pass it over to you, Isil.
Yes, sorry, I'm smiling from cheek to cheek because I love talking about Visual Communications and Isil. The first time I ever met Isil, actually, I didn't meet her. She was facilitating a panel during LA Asian in 2015. It was a weekday evening. I went to a short screening at the Tateyuchi Democracy Center. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to get to know that person, you know. And it was so serendipitous because 10 years later, or so, 10 or so years later, Eseel was moderating the Q&A for Unseen when we had our screening at the Tatuichi Democracy Center, you know, so it's just like so magical, you know. I feel like with visual communications, um, it's been a really incredible opportunity to build a relationship with VC because I feel like they're always interested in uplifting, you know, filmmakers from the community. And even when I feel like I was a baby filmmaker, I didn't really have much to offer, you know, and I feel like Eseel, Francis, and their team were just always so intentional in finding ways to support, you know, me. There was a time when I was attending the LA Asian Pacific Film Festival every year because every short that I've ever done and the first film that I actually worked on as an impact producer, Call Her Ganda, also screened at Visual Communications, you know. And to your point, Sonia, you know, when my family, my siblings and I were very much involved in organizing here in LA. And I didn't realize that, you know, eventually in the course of all my engagements with VC, my younger sibling ended up working at Visual Communications, also Josen, you know, started off, I think, as a volunteer. Actually, I have no idea what Josen ever did, you know, at VC. I just knew that, you know, like VC has been a big part of my family's experience. You know.
It looks like your internet cut out just a moment, but that's beautiful that it's a family affair with VC. Cecile, I'm going to pass it to you. I know that Set's first short film screened in the Visions to Real Festival. Tell us a little bit about, you know, how visual communications identifies and nurtures new talent.
Thank you for that. Like, to continue in Set's point of family, I think because that first film, when Baby Set was a baby filmmaker, it was like in 2016, 2015, I think, a short documentary about their family. And then to see Set continue to be present with VC, we understood Set's storytelling wasn't simply just to become famous. There was an intention to sort of enrich a new understanding about different lifestyles or like different ways to live life. And at VC, the way we kind of model care is, you know, it's not simply just dealing with artists with deliverables, it's dealing with each other holistically. We break bread, we do life together. I say hi to Set's mom if I see him at an event. I say, you know, I'll feed Josen if Josen and I share food together. It's artists, like, we can't just really deal with them with like a deadline. We want to know how they're pulling up holistically and how do we support them to help them dream and ideate and eventually showcase their work. And it's been a joy to be in community with Set and their sibling.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Seeing the full artist, their family, you know, artists aren't birthed alone, right? They come from families, they come from communities, they come from networks, and VC really sees that, and that's really clear. Let's bring Pedro into the conversation, the man of the hour. We loved meeting you and your family and your community of friends in the film. And, you know, being the focus of a feature-length documentary is a unique experience. Tell us a little bit about, you know, what it's felt like to have your story featured in a documentary film, and your relationship with Set really shaped your perspective on documentary filmmaking.
Actually, it has been a very interesting journey. I believe it's important for me to disclose that I'm a very private person and I actually don't like to put my affairs out there. So me being featuring a documentary it's unreal to me. But what allowed me to do that transition to be more public about my life, it was the communion that I had with Set and all the team, because this is a very community-centered project, in which two things to me was the things that allow me to be present and feel safe during this project. One, vulnerability. Him being such a unique, genuine, warm, and kind person and him being able to open up himself to me, that allowed me to feel comfortable, because I feel that sometimes I don't have much I don't have much familiarity with the film industry, but sometimes, at least as an spectator, some of the documentaries that I saw in the past, especially when it was about marginalized communities, is more about, it felt like it was just a group of outsiders trying to dissect a frog, trying to dissect an animal. And when it comes to this particular film, I felt that I was with a group of friends. I felt that I was in community. I felt that he didn't ask me to be vulnerable. He was vulnerable himself in order for him to make me comfortable and for me to be vulnerable, allow me to open up. The other thing that also make a big difference is representation. Seeing people that look like me behind the scene are also allowed me to put my guard down. Seeing other people who either had a disability, who weren't documented, or in somehow reflected my identities, also allowed me to feel comfortable enough and feel that I was in a safe space to share within my story. So the only thing that I can say is thank you, and that I'm very proud and I'm very happy to have been part of this project.
I appreciate that so much, Pedro. You're speaking to the sense of what happens when a filmmaker and the film team shares the vulnerability that the folks on the other side of the camera do, and that you're all moving through this process of vulnerability and inquiry and discovery and sharing of experiences together. It's not you alone going through this process. That's beautiful. Thank you for naming that. And thank you for letting us into your world. And thank you, Seth and Isil and Jason, for bringing this beautiful film to life. I'm going to transition over to Sahar, and we're going to learn a little bit more about Sansón and Me.
Thank you all. That was a really beautiful conversation and a testament to this, the power of this ecosystem. I'm going to bring up the Sansón and Me team. First up is Rodrigo Reyes, a Bay Area-based Mexican-American award-winning filmmaker, film director, whose work often depicts the lives and experiences of Mexicans living in both Mexico and the United States. Sansón and Me is his most recent project, which was just released this spring. Hi, Rodrigo. I'm also going to bring up Daniel Forquio, who is the CEO of Represent Justice, a national narrative change organization that is dedicated to raising awareness around mass incarceration. Represent Justice started as an impact campaign, actually, inspired by the life and legacy of Bryan Stevenson around the Warner Brothers film Just Mercy. And since then, it has been using the power of media to engage audiences in reimagining the justice system and creating real demand for change. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, Sahar. Thank you so much.
And finally, I'm going to bring up Carlos Gutierrez, who is co-founder and ED of Cinema Tropical, which distributes, programs, and promotes Latin American cinema in the US. Welcome, Carlos.
Hello, thank you.
I'll start with you, Rodrigo. Whenever I speak with anyone about this film, one of the first things that people remark on is your process and your commitment to Sansón. And so I thought it'd be useful to start, just to begin with you sharing a bit about what it was like to make this film and collaborate with him and foster accountability with someone who could not directly be in the film about his life.
Yes, of course. And it's wonderful to be here. Thank you all for welcoming us into your space. I think the film really springs from a very natural emotion of wanting to know who this other human being was. We have all been there, and that is really the spark that can lead to connection. I don't think I knew the full scope, you know, of what that would mean. 10 years of working together, really getting involved. I was reading today, for instance, that the place where Sanson is from has the highest number of mass graves in Mexico. Like I just found out today that it's like almost 200 mass graves. So I had no idea of this, but all I knew was like, man, I want to know who this kid was and who he is and what he thinks about this whole process. And I think leading with that and always wondering, how do we build respect? You know, I don't want Sanson to feel like I'm the authority. I'm just another teacher. I'm another figure of power. Let's keep sharing power. And we both learn together. I think if Sanson had been a different person who wasn't so generous and so brave, it would have been difficult, you know. But he was brave enough to teach me during this whole time, and I'm very grateful for that. And you know, like our friendship now is built on that idea that we can trust each other. But that was a process, and the film shows it. You know, it shows the trust building in the film itself, and I think that's what's important. If we really want to get into these difficult issues, we need to be willing to be vulnerable, and he definitely led with example. There's nothing more vulnerable, I think, than being incarcerated. You know, because you have no control of what happens to what you say. And he trusted me, so I had to step up, you know. So I keep giving him props for that. Yeah.
It's really beautiful to hear that. And it comes through, I think, in the storytelling, absolutely. And we have a really special treat for the audience. We invited Sanson to share a bit about his experience on this project as well. And he recorded a message for you all. So I'm gonna ask Andre to please play that clip for us.
Hello, everyone. Although we do not know each other, I hope this message finds you and your loved ones in good health. My name is Sanson Andrade, and I am the protagonist of this film, Sanson and Me. To be honest, in the beginning, I never stopped to think about the message of this film. I just set out to make it with good intentions. Maybe all I wanted was to be honest with you, Rodrigo, and respond to the questions you were asking. Today, I would like the audience to understand that in my life experience, I never had the opportunity of a home and a family, and that the circumstances put me on a path that was not very kind to me. When I say that I want to be an example to the youth, what I mean is that if they have to live in a world like the one I live in, and because of this they are going through a similar problem, don't give up. Fight against the injustice of your life. The value of my story is that it shares the life of a person like any other who faces adversity and never was defeated. This is not the end. Okay, I have a lot of faith that with preparation and enthusiasm, I am going to make my reality turn a corner and overturn injustice. My experience working with Rodrigo has been a unique learning process. I have never seen my story as a tool for growth and healing, and the film changed that. The collaboration was fun, and at the same time, it made me reflect so much on where I came from, so that now I know where I'm going. I just want to say thank you to all the minds that truly see the struggle. I hope for the best. I'm grateful for your time in watching this story of my loved ones, my friend Rodrigo, and me. Have a beautiful day. Love and respect, Sanson Noé Andrade.
I mean, how proud you must be, Rodrigo, to have made a film that makes someone feel that way. Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
It's really a testament to the process you undertook, I think, that Sanson feels the way that he does about this journey. And it's really evident that you centered your relationship with him throughout the process. And I know that's a commitment that you've continued to hold to as you've entered into the distribution phase of your film's life. And for that, I wanted to bring you up, Danielle, and ask you, When I spoke with Rodrigo about his partnership with you, he expressed shock that Represent Justice was the only impact nonprofit who expressed an interest in meeting Sansón. I think that says a lot about the work that you all do. And so I wanted to ask if you can share a bit about your model and why building a relationship with Sansón is so critical to it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sahar. It's so great to be here with the Sansón team and the Unseen team and the folks at Color Congress. My name is Daniel Forchio, and I run Represent Justice, and our work involves partnering with filmmakers and film subjects to tell really authentic stories about the justice system with the goal of systemic change, both ending mass incarceration as well as bringing dignity to the people who've been impacted by it. And of course, I believe very deeply in what Sansón was saying, that the storytelling process can be a healing process. It can be a coping process. And to do good systems work, the first thing that I always want to do is speak directly to the person whose story we are shepherding through that process, through that film campaign process. And sometimes it's a really detailed answer, like Sansón had pages and pages and pages that he had written about his story. And sometimes it's a really simple conversation about, I never want this to happen to someone else, and that's my goal. And I try to approach that conversation not as an impact producer, but just as a human being reaching out to another human being. What do you want? What are you scared of? What are your goals? And then I've crumpled up entire strategies based on that conversation and gone back to the drawing board. And so that is, turning that conversation and that sort of message and those wishes into systems change is the work that we do. And it's both our North Star, translating it into those goals of narrative and culture and capacity building and legislative goals. It's a North Star, but it's also the armor that gives me radical levels of courage to disrupt systems. Even hearing Sansón's recording, I'm filled with that same sense of radical courage to go out there and fight, and it's necessary. And I think it's an intentionality that helps in the work very much.
Thank you so much for the work that you do, and always centering the agency of the communities that are most impacted and at every step. It's really important. Rodrigo, when I asked you which of the organizations have been your greatest champion along your career journey, without any hesitation, you named Carlos and the folks at Cinema Tropical. Can you share a bit about this and what their support has meant to you?
I think for me, as you start trying to craft a film to try to build a path as a director in the world, you get a lot of no's, you get a lot of questionings, you get a lot of doubt. And very few times do you get love and do you get support to just keep going. Not everything is measured in dollars. A lot of the change and the impact of stories is really all about that connection and fighting for that connection. And early on, once my career started to move, and I went to my first big film festival, Carlos was there. He helped me. He didn't know me from anyone. Somebody who connected us, and I talked to him on the phone, and he was super supportive, and he never judged the path by these standards of that basically destroy filmmakers of color. He just said to me, are you gonna keep going, because nobody has a bigger challenge than making another film. And so I've remembered that my whole, ever since then, 10 years ago, actually 10 years ago this month, Carlos, in June at the LA Film Festival. And it was really like shocking that he gave me that perspective of, you got to keep going. So I'm just honored that we're still connected and we're still collaborating.
Carlos, can you share, it's so clear how these organizations like yours really stay with the filmmaker through and through. Can you share a bit about the barriers you see Latina filmmakers experience, in particular in the US distribution and exhibition landscape? And also just a bit about Cinema Tropical's model and how it addresses some of these challenges.
Sure. Well, thanks for the invitation to be here, and thank you, Rodrigo, for your words. for me, it's really a privilege and a big honor to, to be your friend and to be accompany your career. You built such an amazing career, 5 feature films, two, 3 short films. It's pretty impressive. That doesn't happen very often. And in that sense, I think one of the biggest challenges is that validation. We always talk about distribution and exhibition, but there's a lot of filmmakers, that are getting those, their work is getting seen, but the problem is that they don't get the full validation sometimes as their counterparts. So in that sense, I do think Rodrigo is at the forefront of American independent cinema, but a lot of times a lot of our filmmakers just get pigeonholed, depending the ethnic group or the context they come from. So in that sense, I think we need to open up, and because filmmakers like Rodrigo are really pushing the envelope in American nonfiction cinema. What I admire a lot about Rodrigo is that it has built, I think he's a great case study of how to build a really solid and wonderful filmography and taking risks. Because as Rodrigo was saying, a lot of the times, I think a lot of the film industry is completely built in first-time filmmakers. So there's a lot of support for first-time filmmakers. But second, third, fourth films, it's so much harder because you have to be really successful as a filmmaker, particularly of color, either commercially or artistically, in order to aspire to make a second film. So in that sense, we've lost a lot of great talent because they can't jump. That's a big border. There's a big wall trying to make a second film. So Rodrigo has already made 5 films, and not only it's a question of quantity, but also quality. He's been taking impressive artistic risks, regardless of what happens to each films. So I think in that sense, he's a pretty amazing case study of how to build a really vibrant filmography and continue to taking the risks. Because I think also, our system is very complicated in terms of filmmakers get so many opinions from different people in the industry in terms of funding, in terms of workshops. And I think Rodrigo, listens to everybody, but he ultimately knows what's negotiable and what it's not. And particularly with Sansón and Me, I also think what's really important about Sansón and Me is that, particularly American nonfiction, I've seen a big trend throughout the years, and every time most of the discussions just basically end up on moral terms in terms of relationship between the subject and the director. And in that sense, a lot of times filmmakers try to erase any trace of problem, precisely because they can be accused of exploiting or moral relationship. So in that sense, I think Sansón and Me, what Rodrigo does with Sansón and Me, basically he transparents that relationship in a pretty impressive way. So instead of hiding any of the uneven relationship between the director and the subject, he basically transparents his own process. So I think in that sense, it's really pushing the envelope in a very provocative and wonderful way. And just to finish your question, in Cinema Tropical, we're a not-for-profit. We work with both Latin American foreign filmmakers and US Latinx filmmakers. And we work in different capacities as distributors, as programmers, as publicists, as a way again to validate and to validate this wonderful work. And in that sense, we have different programs. And actually, one of them is the Cinema Tropical Awards. Press and audience in general love awards. And we found a good way to also validate the work of many filmmakers. So Purgatorio, Rodrigo has won Purgatorio with his second feature film. He won the Best US Latinx Film Award. And just to finalize all this, I think Rodrigo is also part of a wonderful and influential generation of Latinx filmmakers that are really pushing the envelope, including Natalia Almada, Alex Rivera and Cristina Ibarra, Jonathan Anela and Bogarin. That those names should be really household names in American independent cinema. But again, the problem is the full validation. They're just basically pigeonholed in Latinx cinema, but they should really be they should be as they are at the forefront of American independent cinema.
I could not agree more. Absolutely. I'd like to ask a question that will start with Daniel and you, Carlos, but please, Andrea, bring up the other panelists as well so that everyone can respond to this question. But to everyone here, Color Congress has put its stake in the ground around investing in the strengths and leadership that emerges from the experience of being a person of color navigating through a white dominant culture. And so I want to ask, why are the organizations that you lead uniquely positioned to support filmmakers of color and other leaders of color in the documentary field? And how has your experience as a person of color in this space shaped how you show up for people of color in this space? And please bring up, Andrea, bring up the others so that everybody can respond to this question.
It's such a great question. I think for Represent Justice, our belief in storytelling requires a lot of focus. And we have focused on the system of mass incarceration because we believe that there are so many amazing stories to be told, but our advantage could be channeling them in a very specific way, which requires immersing ourselves in the history, the culture, the narratives on the ground, building up people in the community with that lived experience. And so I think for Represent Justice, it's a strong sense of focus that we can bring to organizing screenings and figuring out key audiences and handling stories with care. I think as the leader of Represent Justice, I come with a strong sense of intersectionality. And I think as a leader of color, it's an analysis that the work of Represent Justice isn't really about Represent Justice. And there's something very liberating and freeing about understanding that as a way to lead the organization better. And so I think that intersectionality allows me to be radical, to be courageous, and to go after solving big problems using the films and the film campaigns that we do, because I see it as part of a bigger liberation that we're going towards.
Thank you, Daniel. Ysil or Jason or Carlos, do you have a response to that question?
Yeah, for me, these stories are just need to be out there. These are stories by people of color and for people with disabilities as well. These stories are just marginalized and people need to get these stories. So let's get them out in the mainstream. And thank you for the Color Congress to really helping all of us in the community get this out.
If I can add also, because we're part of this environment, this ecosystem that is really thriving despite of having everything against it. The fact that Cinema Tropical as a non-for-profit has existed over 22 years on a very difficult context. We've lost a lot of colleagues, a lot of organizations, distribution companies. Everything's changing. So even the existence of our organizations is already a challenge to the system. And the fact that we can still do the same work that we've been doing for over 2 decades, supporting the talent and focusing really, I think one of the big problems of the film world is also like this very self-centered. So everything is tailored to the film, to the film industry, and doesn't really care about the filmmakers and the audience. So for us, it's rethinking that formula. It's putting the filmmakers and the audience at the center of the equation and working around it. So in that sense, I think many organizations should be really case studies, and instead of I've been in this field for almost 25 years, and I think they're still imposing the same Eurocentric, outdated models of success into us, whereas we should be leading, because we're already leading, but we should really take, I think that's also our responsibility. I think we should be much more, taking more responsibility because we know the way, because we've been building it. So I think I think it's a great moment. There's a lot of challenges, but I think we're really thriving, so we should take advantage of that.
Ysil, I saw you nodding your head.
If I could continue we know the way, I think our role at VC is, we've done the dance many times, and what I enjoy, especially with folks like Set, it's like, what do you want to do, Set? Forget everything else. How do you want to tell this story? Do we have to slow down our process so you can tell the story the way you want to do it? And then our job is to kind of almost explain like, all right, we're doing it a little bit different here. And because we encounter all the other humans on the outer circle, to your point, Carlos, like we're able to kind of allow or hold space for Set to do their thing, be the storyteller, do it in a profound way. We'll take care of all the other things as we need to if we have the resources, but you don't have to worry that. And you don't have to worry about explaining it to non-Filipino America. Like, be the Filipino who you want. Like, I always use my mom as an example. Like, if my audience is my mom, and my mom lives in Cerritos, California, where it's hella Filipino, then how do I make success with her as opposed to trying to bring it to other spaces and get my validation elsewhere?
Can I just make a note, piggybacking also, Carlos, on what you said? I think what this ecosystem shows is what it looks like when you center both filmmakers of color and audiences of color. But I think when you think about Daniel visiting Sanson, when you think about Pedro having a relationship with visual communications, we're talking about also centering the people who are telling their stories on camera. And that is unique. That is not of the norm in our field. Our field is not, even though it's built on stories of people who are vulnerable enough to share their lives on camera, the field is not built to center those people. They are subjects. They are not the leaders of the field, yet there would be no field without them. And I think the POC ecosystem tends to understand that and engage with the folks whose stories are being shared in a really different and authentic way. And I think we're seeing that already in this conversation. We have a question from one of our audience members, Juanita Anderson, who is also a filmmaker and a co-founder of Black Public Media and a Color Congress Advisory Board member. And she asks a question for Seth and Rodrigo is, what are the funding challenges for collaborative storytelling and how do you overcome them?
Okay. Well, I just speaking from my experience and from what I've learned from my peers, I think the challenge is that you get questioned for everything. You really do. You get questioned for everything. I bet you if I was Norman Mailer, making a film about a famous, white serial killer or a white case, I would not have had to work for 10 years to fund Sanson and to convince people that the film was worth it, that the relationship was worth it. People would be like, yeah, I read about that in the New York Times the last weekend and it's wonderful. And so you get too many questions. I would say on the end of funders, on the funder brain, I would say, think about how do I interrupt that questioning? How do I create a sense of possibility and authenticity that is true to the stories I'm telling? Sanson is not telling you a hyphen minority story. He is a modern day Ulysses. He is really gathering everything that is happening in our world in so many interesting ways. Parenthood, poverty, questions about destiny and questions about individual responsibility. But I continually found myself pitching small and trying to tell people like, hey, imagine what can happen if you break out of that. If you just did a few things differently, it would be just, a different pathway. So I think that is the reality that I have lived with. And I think a lot of filmmakers of color identify with that. Like we are asked to only, to be super small, like our cages like this, but the stories can run free. And it's just really about changing your perspective. That's the first step, and so I continue to see that. I'm heading off to the UK next week to pitch a new project, and I'm already seeing it. I'm already seeing the bars coming, and I'm like, well, how do I, and it feels like extra work. At the same time, we have to do it if we want to keep going. So I would say just understand that filmmakers are grappling with this duality of resistance and resilience. Like we're constantly on those two tracks and trying to keep our energy up. But that's a lot more work than folks outside of the community. That's a lot more work than the quote unquote mainstream is asking for. So
thanks for naming that extra labor. It's not just emotional labor, it's intellectual labor, but it's labor that's unseen. There's a weight on your filmmaking career when you have to take that additional labor on. Thanks for naming that. Seth, do you want to answer this question?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sonia. And apologies, everyone, my video is off because my internet's acting up. And I appreciate everything that Rodrigo and his team has said. I feel like maybe one of the things that I've also experienced in this process is that this is just my experience. I don't know if other folks experience this too, but I feel like sometimes also like people kind of like tokenize or fetishize the way in which we're doing the filmmaking process for Unseen. You know, I think to what Pedro was saying earlier, we were really deliberate in having a team that really reflects the experiences that Pedro has as a person with disabilities and as an immigrant aspect of our journey gets kind of like fetishized, you know, by the people who are trying to fund us, you know, and I think also because of being an undocumented filmmaker, folks don't always understand how to support, you know, the journey that our team has to go through. And I feel like with our experience with this project also, as we embark into our impact campaign, there doesn't seem to be a lot of resources, to be honest, around, you know, impact campaigns at this stage. And I feel like for our team, you know, we're really interested in making sure that the humanity that Pedro is representing in the film, and also, you know, that we're sharing through our team, is what's really uplifted in the process of bringing this to other audiences.
You know, the films, both of these films, the artistry of them are astounding. Rodrigo, the vision and the creativity of and commitment to tell the story despite all odds. Set, I think about the moments in the film when you invite us to be in Pedro's experience, and the moments the camera work invites us to step away. It's really delicate and gentle the way that you work that camera, but it is absolutely beautiful. The choices that you make are gorgeous. And I want to ask a question about appetite, you know, for films like these. Isil, Carlos, Daniel, and Jason. The commercial sector has been really clear about its narrow interest in true crime, celebrity, sports documentaries. They're arguing that audiences are more interested in these three topics. What can you tell us about audience appetite for the documentaries you support and platform?
If I can jump in, and you know, what I've seen after all these decades is that coming back to the idea that I say that the film industry is so self-centered. So there's a lot of interest in the films. So a lot of our work is basically taking the films out of the film world. Really, again, making that, going to the basic and making those direct connections between the filmmakers, the films, and the audiences. So I do think there's more and more interest, but a lot of the times we as film professionals, we're the first ones boycotting that natural connection between, because the film world is so fragmented by different interests, you know, from the film festivals, your premieres, the sales agents, the programmers of festivals, cinematheques, everybody has a stake on it. But so everybody comes and grabs their slice of the pie, but we don't see the full picture. And also that's a big problem in the film world, that for the most part, the filmmakers are completely by themselves. They're the only ones in the whole process, from making the film to getting an audience. We as film professionals, we only come a certain point and then we leave. So we need to create a more fluid relationships with the filmmakers so we can accompany all the way through and support them and help them find their audiences as well.
I could not agree more. And as you know, one of the roles of Represent Justice is to be part of that steady drumbeat that is making these stories popular. And so that's why we exist as a nonprofit. It's partly to shift that culture, and it's something that we take super seriously because impact campaign funding is really scarce. And so we exist to really be able to make that impact as well. And what I would say is that when we message test these films, the levels of sentiment and concern and care and support are off the charts. And I think that what I would like for folks that don't feel like there's that much of an appetite to really consider that public demand, the impetus to boycott, vote, donate, take action within the community is audience demand, and folks don't really measure it that way. But when you really start to think about it, you can really understand the narrative power and audience potential that you might be overlooking within communities. And that's something that I try to make the case for quite often.
If I can add, in terms of that public demand, I think often what we've seen at VC, that demand kind of begins with sort of like being bought into the success of this new film coming out. We were very like ecstatic to have like a sold out show for the Unseen North American or US premiere at LA Asian. But that swell of enthusiasm was like to your point, Daniel, it was the drumbeat of people like, I'm ready for this film. And then I started to see like ancillary people, like doc fans are like, oh, what is this new Filipino film? Or what is this Latine film? And those humans I know already kind of bought into the sort of like, let me find a film that may connect to the life I lead. But you need the humans to be with the director to kind of so that the director's not talking about it their whole entire process. They need the sort of the cheerleaders talking about it, like, oh, this is coming down the pipeline, like watch out for this one.
I think we want to thank folks and bring this conversation to a close. But first, we want to just express our gratitude for each of you, for your time today, for your commitment to filmmakers and artists and communities of color. Deep bow, Seth and Rodrigo, to your artistry and your commitment to your craft. Deep bow to the ecosystem that loves up on these artists. An even deeper bow to Sanson and to Pedro for opening up their hearts to the filmmakers and to the larger community by sharing their stories with us. I think what this conversation to me underscores is that when we center care and transparency and justice, and when we make ourselves as vulnerable as we're asking people to make themselves in front of a camera, that film can be an incredible source of healing and a tool for justice. That is really apparent in both of these films and these filmmakers' processes. I also want to, before we let folks go, we want to make sure that you know that these films will come to your communities and to broadcasts near you. Please let others know that Sanson and Me will have its public broadcast premiere on ITVS on September 26th. Unseen will have its public broadcast premiere on POV on January 1st of next year. Important note that these are both on public television, champions for independent nonfiction cinema. If you are in the Bay Area, you can see Unseen sooner or share it with your friends. It will be screening at the QuackMap Film Festival. QuackMap is a Color Congress member organization that's in the Bay Area on June 10th at 3 p.m. And I think, again, lastly, this is a love letter to the POC documentary ecosystem. These organizations are founded by filmmakers and artists themselves who understand truly the value of this work, of the value of these stories, that audiences of color are the incredible audiences for nonfiction film. And that these films do more than just entertain and educate us. They move us closer to justice, and they remind us all of our common humanity. So thank you so much for sharing your work with us. And if you'd like to know more about any of the films, filmmakers, participants, or organizations, please reach out. And we'd love to hear from you. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Andrea, for holding things down on the tech side.